Learn the truth and it will set you free. True Stories Studio presents a film by Yuri Zablotsky. JFK, Mayor from Boston. This footage has traveled the world a million times. President Kennedy arrives in Dallas, Texas for a several-hour visit. Thousands of people have gathered at the airport, tens of thousands are standing in the streets, they are waiting to greet him, but they are not the only ones waiting. In 40 minutes, he'll be dead and a Texan will take his place. And then, like a cheap action movie, the only official suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, will be sent to the grave on live television. Watch as he's led to the slaughter in a basement where about 70 police officers are gathered. This, in general terms, is the plot of the tragedy, rightly called the murder of the century, because never before or since had the violent death of a foreign leader caused such a painful reaction throughout the world. It was obvious even then that the shots in Dallas had crossed an entire, albeit very short, stage of history. "I feel like my brother is dead," a cab driver from Venezuela said in those days. Doesn't it seem like a paradox? The cab driver thought his brother was the son of a millionaire. The sharks of big business, on the contrary, were against him, considering him almost a communist. In fact, John F. Kennedy was certainly not a communist. He was only trying, to the best of his ability, to fix what was hopelessly outmoded in the system, and to change what was a threat in advance, before the roof started to fall on his head. He was trying to cure a system that had originally been designed to resist modernization. Having never worked a day in business, Kennedy did not know the environment well enough to whom he hoped to explain the obvious. For example, that a family of 3 cannot pay more taxes than a corporation, and that in a couple of decades the U.S. will inevitably face a flood of migrants. And many other things John F. Kennedy talked about, but he was unwilling to listen. He tried his best to save the system, but he was designated as its enemy, and it cost him his life. And, frankly, not just hers. In fact, he continues to be killed to this day, only now in a different, much more sophisticated way, not physically, but morally, with the help of the mass media endowing the image and character of one of the most popular presidents in U.S. history with a set of traits designed to cause a sense of legitimate disgust in normal people. Kennedy is portrayed as a drug addict, a lecher, a corrupter, and absolutely everything in his activities is questioned: his capacity, authorship of his books and speeches, and the awards he honestly earned during the war. In fact, only 7 months after Dallas, Esquire magazine published an article titled "Kennedy Without Tears," the first, albeit relatively cautious, blow to President Kennedy's legacy. The author was irritated by everything about him, from his struggle to protect civil rights to his Boston accent in his voice and the memorial plaque in the White House bedroom. In fact, one thought, why, one might ask, would one be upset with a man who allowed himself to call all businessmen sons of bitches? The question was meant to be entirely rhetorical, but we will take it seriously. Indeed, should we regret the death of the 35th President of the United States? Is it fair to disparage him as a golden figure who could talk a lot, convincingly and beautifully, but had little knowledge of what he was doing? And also, what was this man? What was the secret of his popularity? And, finally, what is the real reason why he has remained the object of a globalized, purposeful malicious harassment for so many years? We are going to tell you about it right now, based on documents, eyewitness accounts, and sound recording devices installed in President Kennedy's office. Stay with us, watch it to the end, tell your friends about it. Once, as a senator, John F. Kennedy was touring his hometown of Boston in company with John Powers, the local leader of his party, and Powers showed him his old house, the house he had lived in as a child. "Look," Kennedy exclaimed, "and you told me you grew up in poverty, didn't you? But the house I was born in looked a lot worse. As you can see, I came up the hard way." "Yeah, you came up the hard way," agreed Powers. "One morning they didn't bring you your breakfast in bed. You can't argue with that. The starting opportunities of the son of a millionaire, as John F. Kennedy was, were significantly different from those of children from other families. But life always maintains some kind of balance. While giving a person something, it also limits him in something else. And so it was in our case." Joseph Kennedy, the father of the future President of the United States, was an Irishman by birth. In 1914, he, then still very small, though, however, and the youngest banker, up to his ears in debt, married Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of the mayor of Boston, whom he knew well since childhood. The girl's father objected, not because he had anything against Joseph, but because of bad relations with his father, but the potential son-in-law showed persistence, and even promised to become a millionaire by 35 years of age. And this promise he overfulfilled. Joseph got rich mainly on the stock exchange, with the help of pools. This was the name of an agreement between partners who bought cheap shares of some company and resold them to each other, which, with the help of investments in advertising, artificially inflated the real demand. Having brought the price of shares up to the maximum, they were sold and left with a profit, while those who bought them were left with a nose. The law did not consider this a prohibited technique, not until President Roosevelt appointed Joseph Kennedy to head the State Commission to regulate the stock exchange. It may seem incredible, but all of his own schemes to enrich himself were immediately banned. Today, however, Joseph Kennedy is trying to attribute to illegal smuggling of alcohol during the period of Prohibition in the U.S., in order to underpin the fact that his family allegedly had ties to the mafia. It's all out of thin air. Joseph became interested in alcoholic beverages no sooner than he learned from Franklin Roosevelt about the imminent repeal of Prohibition, and together with the eldest son of the president, Jimmy, bought in England whiskey for $118,000, as well as gin, which beforehand imported into the country on the basis of official permission from the government as if for medical purposes. With a truly unique instinct, Joseph managed to get among the units that were not affected during the stock market crash of 1929, which forced almost the entire country to stand in line for free soup. A month or so before Black Thursday, to the surprise of everyone else, he withdrew all his money. He later said he was prompted to make the decision by a shoeshine man standing near the entrance to the exchange. "He snapped the cloth over my shoes," Joseph recalled, "and told me what was going to happen to various stocks and offerings on the market that day. I listened as a look down to him, and when I left the place, I thought, when the time comes that a shoeshine boy knows as much as I do about what is going on in the stock market, and is entirely correct, there is something wrong either with me or with the market, and it's time for me to get out of there." Joseph and Rosa had 9 children, 4 boys, Joe, John, Bobby, and Edward, and 5 girls, Rosemary, Kathleen, Eunice, Pat, and Jean. Their parents took care of them, but at the same time tried to keep them from feeling like what they now say were majors, shielding them from the corrupting influence of easy money. We tried to teach them that money brings with it responsibility, Rosa said. We explained to the children that money is not spent but used, and that there is nothing more vulgar than showing off one's wealth. We never gave them more pocket money than parents gave to neighborhood children. No one talked about money in Boston, and we made it a rule never to talk about money in our home. These words are well illustrated by a surviving childhood letter from John F. Kennedy. My recent allowance is 40 cents. This I used for aeroplanes and other playthings of childhood, but now I am a scout and I put away my childish things. Before I would spend 20 cents of my 40 cents allowance, and in 5 minutes I would have empty pockets and nothing to gain and 20 cents to lose. When I am scout, I have to buy canteens, haversacks, blankets, search lids, etc. that will last for years, and I can always use it, while I can't use a chocolate marshmallow sundae with vanilla ice cream, and so I put in my plea for a raise of 30 cents for me to buy scout things and pay my own way more around. Only occasionally was money used as an incentive. For example, each of the children who would not drink or smoke before the age of 21 was promised $2,000. I never checked or asked them about it, Joseph would later tell reporters. It was only calculated honesty. On the 21st anniversary, I wrote them 2 checks and left it up to them to decide if they could take it. 2 of them returned the checks back to me. One of those returners was John. He and the students had a beer. To each of his children, the father said roughly the following: I don't care what you do in life, but whatever you do, you owe it to yourself to be the best at your profession. Even if you have to be a digger, you have to be the best digger in the world. 2nd or 3rd place doesn't count. We want winners, he emphasized. And we don't want to see around any losers. The spirit of constant competition between the children was fueled and developed through intellectual games and numerous sports. Even over meals, the family had heated discussions about news, books read, movies watched. Familiar people noted that the children could relax only by sleeping. The rest of the time they were doing many things. John and Joe were allowed to swim in boats on their own when they were very young, and their heads were not even visible from the shore, so the boats looked empty. From the age of 6 or 7, even the girls participated in endless swimming competitions, competed in tennis, volleyball, golf, and were bitter about losing. Slacking off and feeling sorry for themselves was not allowed. The Kennedys, my father used to say, don't cry. Joseph especially liked rugby, a very hard contact power game played regularly on the front lawn. Tom Schreiber, a school friend of the oldest of the brothers, Joe, recalled, we had kids hanging on us from all sides. We were older and stronger than they were, and of course we were winning. There were a lot of trees around the lawn. I always tried to keep an eye out for these when I ran, but Joe, John and Bobby forgot, and kept crashing into them. There were quite a few occasions when one or the other of the boys was carried off the field unconscious. They were always bandaged and bruised. There is no denying that this kind of hardening was certainly fruitful, and John would need it more than once or twice in his life. The other question is that children could just as easily be hardened by less traumatic sports. It's hard to explain that a loving, that can't be taken away, father obviously didn't consider this possibility. He also looked through his fingers at his brothers' fights, which sometimes turned bloody. I will intervene, he explained to friends, when I see them not fighting together against others. This philosophy of pathological desire for superiority at any cost and brought to the grotesque maximalism painfully Onut family in the future. The desire to be famous will ruin Joe. Rugby will forever undermine John's health. And Kathleen will make an unjustified decision on a private plane to fly in a thunderstorm, and will become a victim of an airplane crash. His father's undisputed favorite was Joe, who resembled him in character. Sturdily built, unusually ambitious, he at school has not hidden his plans to become the future President of the United States. The eldest son looked like a crown prince, able to achieve anything. His studies were easy for him. However, as an athlete, he was always and everywhere an unquestionable leader. Skinny, shy, and very often ill, John, no matter how hard he tried, could not compete with him. At the London School of Economics, he stayed only a month, in the College of Preston University too, and had to leave because of hepatitis. A little healed, he decided in 1936 to continue his studies at Harvard, but even their illnesses did not give him peace. Influenza did not allow him to participate in the swimming team. Later he was not taken to the rugby team. The reason was trivial: lack of weight. At his tall height, he weighed only 67 kilograms. But John decided to prove his skill, starting to play for the youth team. Unfortunately, this venture turned out for him an incurable spinal injury. The unbearable pain in his back from that day on became a constant companion of his life. At least half the days he lived on our land he was in severe physical pain, his younger brother Bobby would later say. He had diphtheria in his early teens, and as he grew older, he severely injured his spine. Growing up together, we often joked that a mosquito drinking his blood might consider itself doomed. After the war he spent a long time in hospital in Chelsea. In 1954 he underwent a difficult and painful operation, and spent the 1958 election campaign on crutches. But in all that time I never heard a word of complaint from him. I never heard him say that God was unfair to him, at least, he never even hinted at it. Those closest to him could only guess that he was in pain because he was slightly pale. The wrinkles in his eyes deepened, and his voice sounded a little sharper than usual. Outsiders, on the other hand, guessed nothing. He doesn't complain about his troubles, so I won't complain about mine, was the feeling we always had. John didn't have the stars in his studies. Even after pulling himself up, he was able to finish school only in 64th place out of 112 students. But in the results of a survey of classmates, he was listed as one who is likely to succeed in life. In college, however, his parents suddenly found him doing better. "I'm impressed with how you've changed almost completely this year," Dad wrote. "You know, I always thought you had great abilities, and I think you are now beginning to realize them. You make a great impression on people older than you and they treat you with great respect." In the spring of 1940, John defended with honors his thesis on the Munich conspiracy between Britain and France and Adolf Hitler. He wrote twice as much as was required, 150 pages instead of 70. "Two things I have always known about you," his father would write him proudly. "One, that you are smart. The other, that you're an outstanding guy. Love you." John offered to publish the thesis and his father helped him do it. The book was given the intriguing title, "Why Did England Sleep?" Although John's former teacher, Professor Lasky, wrote a negative review, saying that no publisher would have printed the book if John had not been the son of a millionaire, the print run sold out remarkably quickly. It sold 40,000 copies in the US and about the same number of copies in England, and hit the bestseller list. John received $40,000 in royalties and was able to buy a car with his money. Before that, trying to play on the stock market, he earned only $200. His older brother, meanwhile, was already deeply immersed in politics. He was among the delegates to the convention of the Democratic Party, but instead of supporting the nomination of incumbent President Franklin Roosevelt for a third term, he, breaking the unity of the party, rather sharply opposed him, which caused irritation among his fellow party members. They even complained to his father about Joe, but he explained that he could not influence him. If Joe were alive, John would still surpass him in politics, Joe's classmate would later say. John sought always to compromise. Joe never liked that. World War II cut short both brothers' studies. Joe volunteered for the army and John followed in his footsteps, but rugby again reminded of itself. The medical commission because of the spine rejected the guy, and the next 6 months he spent intensively strengthening the painful back, before the next commission recognized him still fit to serve in the Navy. Looking much younger than his 25 years and nicknamed Shafty because of his thinness, John looked less like a sailor than an officer. His future friend Paul Fay described their first meeting this way: "We started to play and this skinny kid in a Harvard football sweater came walking down to the field and watched us. He asked if he could get into the game. I said sure, if he got another guy for the other team, which he did in a few minutes. But not 5 minutes later he started arguing with me about the rules. I wanted to brain him. I figured he was one of the officers' kid. Well, the next day, we started classes on how to operate the boats and it turns out that this same skinny kid is our instructor." On April 26, 1943, the young officer took command of the old wooden torpedo boat PT-109, not suspecting yet that it was this vessel that would soon make him famous. It happened on August 2, 1943, 40 miles from the naval base. At 2 a.m. in total darkness, the PT-109 boat was rammed by a Japanese destroyer, cutting it in two. Kennedy, standing at the helm, the impact threw his back on the bridge railing. Sailors heard a cry of pain. The next moment everyone was in the water, 2 crewmen were killed. 11 survivors clung to the wreckage of the boat, which by some miracle remained afloat. Everything else was drowned before their eyes in a flash of flame. The gasoline spilled on the water caught fire. There were 2 more boats nearby, PT-162 and PT-169, but when they saw the fire, they concluded that the entire crew was dead and hurriedly sailed to the base, leaving the survivors to their fate. The PT-109 crew members realized that they were not going to be rescued only in the morning. It looked like they had been written off, as it turned out to be. At the base they were honored with a minute of silence and began to write condolences to their families. Meanwhile, the piece of the ship was sinking. A deserted island loomed in the distance, and Kennedy suggested trying to swim to it, especially since there was nothing else to do. At any moment the Japanese could appear on the horizon. He undertook to help the burned mechanic, and dragged him behind him, holding the straps of his life jacket in his mouth. The others swam holding on to a log. They reached shore 5 hours later, 15 hours after the accident. Everyone was barely alive, and apart from the mechanic, 2 other crew members were in pretty bad shape. Their situation looked dire. There was nothing growing on the island except palm trees, and no one had any water or food with them. So as soon as it got dark, Kennedy, armed with a signal flashlight, headed into the strait, hoping to attract the attention of patrol boats if they sailed by. The voyage was fruitless, and, exhausted, he decided to turn back, but a wave came up, preventing him from approaching the shore. John returned only 12 hours later and lost consciousness right on the shore. All the next night the third officer, named Ross, was in the strait, but he was not more fortunate. The crew, starving and thirsty, had to make a new voyage. They crossed to a neighboring island, and were very glad to find coconuts lying on the ground. Now, at any rate, they had something to drink. It was only on the fourth day that the Americans who were beginning to say goodbye to life were noticed by the natives passing by in a pirogue. They did not understand anything in English, but John carved all the necessary information on a walnut shell with a penknife. The natives know the place 11 alive. Kennedy. This nut would then lie on a table in his presidential office until his last day. The sinking of the warship was, of course, investigated and the commander's actions were deemed correct. Kennedy was promoted in rank and was awarded 2 awards, the Order of the Purple Heart and the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. About his courage began to write, though he himself saw nothing special here. When asked how to become a hero, he always answered the same way, "It wasn't by my will. They took my ship and sank it." He declined an offer to return to the United States and expressed a desire to continue his service, but this was no longer feasible. Severe malaria put him in the hospital, and his weight dropped to 56 pounds, well below normal. On the base they looked at him with horror. Military doctors performed an operation on his back that was not quite successful. After hitting the captain's bridge, its condition worsened dramatically. November 18, 1943, John was discharged from military service and spent the next 8 months alternating hospitalization with a vacation at his parents'. According to Charles Spaulding, a close acquaintance of his father, on his first visit, barely crossing the threshold of the house, John expressed a desire to visit a nightclub. "I suppose," Spaulding said, "that in the Pacific, holding onto the wreck of a PT-109, John thought he would never see a pretty girl or hear dance music again." The transformation of his younger brother into a leader with accomplishments was apparently beginning to worry Joe. His parents' theory of second to none kept pushing him forward, but piloting a Liberator bomber in search of enemy submarines, he was never able to accomplish anything he thought was meaningful. Those who served with him noticed that he was suffering. The opportunity came unexpectedly in July 1944, when Joe was preparing to return to the States after serving 2 tours of duty. His things were already sent to New York, when he learned of a new top-secret special task. It was required to take a bomber filled with multi-ton explosives on a certain course, and then jump out with a parachute, after which the kamikaze plane will be remotely directed to the target. Joe immediately volunteered. At first everything went according to plan, but suddenly the explosives suddenly detonated after takeoff. Neither Joe nor the co-pilot had time to leave the bomber yet. "Joe was the star of our family," John F. Kennedy would tell a Boston Herald reporter years later. "He did everything better than we did. If he were alive, he would have gone into politics and been elected to Congress, then to the Senate, like I did. And just like me he would have fought for the vice presidential nomination in 1956, but unlike me he would have won. But he still wouldn't have been elected vice president, and his political career would have been over." But we will tell you more about this and other significant episodes in the future life of John F. Kennedy in the next series.